How many of you guys have shopped at Shoe Carnival? Okay. Now, if you guys had ever gone, and or if you were a regular, what were you specifically looking for when you went? Shoes, but maybe if you guys were looking for a specific sale, there's a common sale that Shoe Carnival is known for. BOGO. You buy one, get one half off. They run that sale all the time, often throughout the year. And I remember working at Shoe Carnival in high school, and that sale was a regular, and people were regularly in there for that specific sale. And they'd be like, if it wasn't going on, they're like, what? You guys always have the sale going on. I'm like, I know, it's the 5 weeks of the year that we don't have it going on. Come back next week. But we actually never knew when it was going to happen. But either way, we had customers coming in, and there were these Nike slides. Those were always those sandals, open-toed shoes that people were, you can't get those on sale. So people would come in all the time to Shoe Carnival and be like, oh, it's BOGO, and they'd grab those two Nike slides, and they'd come up to the checkout and so excited that they found the deal. And we're like, guys, over and over again, it says these are excluded. That's not a part of the buy one, get one half off. And they're like, what? But it's BOGO. And it's like, yes, but Nike's contract with us says you guys can sell our shoes. But these are premium shoes. They're not allowed to be part of BOGO. Well, as a worker for Shoe Carnival, I appreciated that I could always go back to a contract and say, hey, don't get upset with me. This is literally the contract that Nike has with us saying, you guys are allowed to sell these slides, but they're not a part of BOGO. So I relied on the contract. We are pretty familiar with contracts. We have contracts. Used to, our phones had a contractual agreement, like for 2 years, you sign the contract. Same with like cable services and satellite and all those. We have that with trash. We have that with all these other things, such as we provide this service to you, such as Nike, Shoe Carnival. Maybe even a contract of a leasing contract. Contract's coming up. We got to sign that contract again. It's coming up to terms. Or contracts with your construction contractor. Yeah, we have contracts a lot. Now, I know there could be a few different answers to this question, but what would you not want to write a contract for? I'll ask it a different way. What would be an insult if you showed up having to have a written form of agreement, a contract to sign?
A wedding.
A wedding? I was thinking even just a first date. Can you imagine sitting down at the table to meet this person for the first time, and you're having a first date, and they're like, okay, now here's the contract that we're going to be signing tonight. Now, it says on here that both parties on the other side of the table is going to be signing with this date, saying this is our contractual agreement for this relationship. Wow. Very transactional at that point. You're like, what are we, some business partnership in this relationship? I'm a little confused here. It might be a little bit of an insult because usually we think of a contract of providing certain services or goods. You do this, I pay you this much, or I agree to trade you with this other service. Not very romantic for a first date. Sounds very business oriented. We're in a business partnership, you and me. Oh, wonderful. If we would dangerously oversimplify a difference between a contract and a covenant, well, first off, let me ask you, what even is a covenant? An agreement, right? So there's some similarities here. Oh, oversimplified, dangerously oversimplified. Contracts, you can usually think about things, services, goods. It's what we're trading off. Okay, dangerously oversimplified. We can go with that. So when it comes to a covenant, goods might be involved. Let's really focus on the relationship. It's really honed in on what this relationship means. It's being able to uphold that relationship and what goes into it. And like I said, maybe goods and services come part of it, but you really think about the other party that's involved, the other person that's involved. I care about you. And this is what I'm committing to you. With goods, it's like, how many of you personally know the trash man? I don't. Maybe at one point we did. But a lot of it is, hey, a contract is, I need my trash taken care of, and you guys are providing that service. It's not really built on a relationship. That covenant focuses on the relationship that I'm having and committing to you. Okay, again, maybe dangerously oversimplified. But if we can at least start there, that's something to start with. We can think of it in a different way. Contracts are transactional, focused on those goods and services, while covenants are relational, focused on that relationship itself. It's this deeper, more relational significance to it. So, I want us to consider one event that I got to read the other day. As I was going through, every single year I try to go through the Bible in a year, and it's always a different translation. And this year I was getting to this part of the story, and I said, well, wait a minute, here's a covenant. We often think of covenants of something that maybe God made with us, right? And covenants really were something that they were utilizing all the time back then. Just maybe not in our culture as much. And so there was a story that came up the other day in Genesis 31. And we can turn there. You guys can take your time to turn to Genesis 31. We won't read through all of it. Wow, I rarely ever have to turn to Genesis 31. I was going way in the middle of the Bible. So yeah, don't go in the middle of the Bible. Go to the very beginning. Genesis 31. We have this situation between Jacob and Laban. Laban is Jacob's father-in-law, the father of Jacob's two wives. What? I said that right. Yeah, two wives. Okay, can you guys give a little bit of context of why Jacob even has two wives? Any of you remember?
He worked 7 years for the first and 7 years for the second.
He worked 7 years for the first one? Well, actually, he worked 7 years for Rachel, is the agreement he makes with Laban. That's the agreement he made. What does Laban do?
The first one.
Yeah, he gives Leah. He said, well, actually, I know what I said 7 years ago, but it's not right to give the second daughter before the first, so you can have Leah. Jacob's like, we agreed to Rachel. I want Rachel. How about this? You give me Rachel now, I'll work for you another 7 years. That's my agreement to you, even though you keep breaking yours. Okay. They make that agreement. So you've got the situation going on. Can you feel a little bit of tension in the relationship? Yeah, maybe. So now he's got these two wives. He's got a couple of kids now, a couple. And, okay, he's got quite a few kids. He's got quite a few possessions because he's worked for Laban for all these years. And, well, he's been a good worker. He's done Laban right, for the most part. There's maybe some things here and there, but that's the context of where we get to. Here in Genesis 31, Jacob starts to hear that Laban's sons are complaining about Jacob. And he starts to notice the change in Laban's attitude toward him too. He said, I better get out of Dodge here pretty soon before Laban starts to mistreat me even more. And so God commands Jacob to return to his homeland. You've been working here with Laban for the past several years. Go ahead and go back to your homeland. Take your wives, take your kids, take everything that you have, go there. And God promises to be with Jacob. So Jacob explains this to his wives, Rachel and Leah, about Laban's deception, and he recounts how God has blessed Jacob despite all of this these past several years. So he tells them of God's command to leave. So we look at verse 5. He says to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've served your father well with all of my strength, and yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. Woo. But God did not permit him to harm me. So then looking at verse 14, Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? I mean, to him, we're just regarded as foreigners now. For he has sold us, and he intended, indeed, devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. So, both wives support Jacob. That's a good start. Acknowledging their father's unjust treatment. So, they secretly depart. Jacob, his wives, his children, his livestock, they leave secretly while Laban is away shearing his own sheep. But in the midst of all this, Rachel goes into her father's household and takes his gods, his little idols for some reason. And great, thank you. Like we needed some extra tension in the story. That's not going to come out too good. So now, Laban comes back and he finds out, hey, they left secretly without even letting me tell my own daughters goodbye, without letting me tell my own grandkids goodbye. And then he finds out, hey, where are my idols? Oh, great. So he goes out in hot pursuits to go chase them down. But then this warning that God tells Laban in a dream, warning him, do not harm Jacob. So God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream by night, and he said to him, be careful not to do anything toward him. Do not say anything good or bad. Let's just not say anything. That might be better. Well, Laban catches up with Jacob and he confronts him about leaving secretly and stealing his gods. Laban says to Jacob, what have you done that you have tricked me and driven away my own daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre? Why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. And now you have gone away because you long greatly for your father's house. Why did you steal my gods? Jacob in defense is like, hey, I didn't steal your gods. Like, first off, you're making a lot of accusations. He says, and honestly, I left secretly because I was scared of what you were going to do to us. You started to mistreat us again. I was getting scared of what you would do to us. I thought you would take away your daughters by force. So he denies even knowing about the stolen gods. And Laban searches Jacob's tents and everything, looking for all the gods, and he can't find them. Well, Rachel still has them, right? She hides them in the camel's saddlebag, satchel, purse, whatever, and she sits on them. And as her father's going through all these different tents looking for his gods, his idols, he comes to Rachel's tent, and she's sitting on them. He's looking through the tent, and she's like, I'm sorry, Father, I cannot get up because it's my time of the month. And he's like, okay, whatever. So he leaves. He doesn't find the idols anywhere. Okay. Whew, I guess we made it. I don't know. But Jacob's like, dude, seriously, all your accusations. So we still have this tension between Jacob's crew and Laban. This is where we come to, and why were you reading this? What could be a solution between these two parties? What could be a solution between these two parties? That's quite a bit of tension right now. Relationship's pretty icy. Mm-hmm. Covenant. Covenant, that's where we're coming to. Is let's make a covenantal relationship between us. Mend up some things. So Jacob reprimands Laban, his father-in-law, for his unjust accusations and lists his own loyalty and hard work over the years. Jacob became angry and berated Laban at verse 36. Jacob said to Laban, what's my offense? What is my sin to you that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. You've gone, what is that? When the police come through and they check your car?
Search.
Okay, search. Wow, that was a lot easier than I thought. What?
Rifle.
Right, but okay, yeah, he went through a search. I thought there was another word for it, but anyways. So he goes through searching through all of his stuff, and he's like, "You've not found any of your household goods amongst us. Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen. If you found anything, let them decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you, Laban. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts, I did not bring it to you. Instead, I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There it was, by day. The heat consumed me. In the night, that was cold. All those 20 years, my sleep fled from my eyes. So these past 20 years, I've been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times, Laban. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you have sent me away empty-handed. But God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands, and he rebuked you last night." So Laban responds and answers and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, how about this? Let's make a covenant, you and I. Let it be a witness between you and me." So Laban acknowledges that everything Jacob now has is honestly in his own hands, and he proposes a covenant to ensure this future peace between the two. I want us to look at what this covenant really is that they made. They set up this pillar and these heaps of stones as a witness. Sometimes covenants were also like saying, look, even the heavens, the stars, they're all witnessing this covenant agreement between us. God is witnessing this agreement between us. Let them witness and be of testimony if either of us breaks this covenant. And so he says, he calls it Gilead, the heap of witness, and Mizpah, the watchtower. For he said, "The Lord watches between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us to see, God is witness between you and me." So then Laban said to Jacob, "You see this heap and the pillar, which I have set between you and me? This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me, to do harm." Let's say it differently. I love this picture. If nothing else, it's almost like territorial lines. It's this reminder, you know what, I just thought of this. There's this another time that Jesus says, look, if you guys come to the altar and you realize that there's this grudge between you and your brothers, leave the sacrifice at the altar and go make amends. Go reconcile with your brother and then come offer to the altar. It's like this accountability. Before you come to this boundary, make sure everything else is right. And in this covenant that they're agreeing to, they're saying, look, here's this, the pillar and everything right here. And the covenant that we're making is, if we cross this line, we know that with our heart we're not going to cross this line to do harm to the other. If you cross this line, you are not going to do harm to the other person. So before you even get there, check the heart. Go through the process. Because that's the covenantal relationship that we are now agreeing to between the two of us. We know that there's been a lot of tension here between us. But this is our covenantal relationship. They sit down and they have this sacrificial meal together and this covenantal meal together. And it's hard to probably have a meal together with an enemy. It's a pretty intimate thing to sit at the same table. Say, come into my own house. And they're not necessarily sitting at a house, but we understand that. Sometimes we say it's hard to be in the same room with that person, right? They're sitting here together, having this covenantal meal, this relationship together, spending the night on this mountain. And as the final farewell, Laban blesses his daughters and grandchildren before returning home. Well, there you go. It's just another example of a covenantal agreement that took place in their culture often. We don't necessarily do that kind of thing. Do you imagine making that kind of covenant with somebody? A lot goes into it. And they were making sacrifices. We'll talk about that next week, what that even entailed. And the seriousness of making covenants. We see these promises and stipulations laid out along with the blessings or the consequences for breaking this covenant. We don't walk into a covenant lightly. There is one area in our culture today that you might hear somebody mention a covenant. What is that? There's one spot that you might hear somebody mention a covenant.
Wedding.
A marriage covenant. Some pastors, and they're really emphasize this covenantal relationship that you two are making and bounding yourselves together. That is not just a I saw one commentary really trying to emphasize a contract can be you break it and that's done. You break the contract and we're not in this partnership anymore. In the covenant, there's a lot more of this promise of as long as we live. And yet, even that, we see sometimes where people broke those covenants. Throughout Israel and God, did they keep the covenant perfectly? No. There was a lot of times God had to renew the covenant. But this marriage covenant, it's that agreement and promise between these two people, these two parties, to support and love and be faithful to each other as long as they both shall live. And it defines their relationship. There's legal documentation along with it, making this covenant in front of witnesses. I mean, doesn't that sound similar? These two parties coming together and saying, here's the witnesses, saying, this is the covenant that we're making together. And you guys are experiencing, witnessing that same covenant that we are making to each other. There's a lot that goes into it to define this new covenantal relationship. And I hadn't noticed this at first, but whether you sign a paper on your first date or not, there are still general rules that go with being in a relationship, right? Rules define a relationship, and especially within a marriage covenant. You're saying, hey, I'm committing to be faithful to you. If there's not going to be another person that I'm going to be with, like I am committed to you. And that's one of those things that Jesus says, hey, there's that one spot of sexual immorality that somebody broke the marriage covenant. They had agreed to one man, one woman coming as one. And there's that broken covenant. So we've got all those things, and yet we see there are those rules in even our friendships that we know we've crossed those lines if they're broken. We know when someone has broken those kind of rules, and those rules did define that relationship. They were those guidelines, and God helped establish what our relationship is with Him. In the Old Testament, that's what He was saying. He's like, hey, Noah, this is my covenant with you. This is my covenant with all the people. Hey, Abraham, this is my covenant with you. And He kept giving them these covenants, especially with Moses. We know that one. I mean, we usually talk about the Ten Commandments, but we talk about all the other laws that came with it. So we all see all these different ones, and even with the new covenant that God gave us. There's ever times that you might get surprised by how God helps define this new relationship that we have with Him. You might be reading in the New Testament and, hatred is like murder? Oh man, that's to a whole new level. Well, God's like, yeah, that's part of our relationship. Yes. You're talking about do not swear. Keep your yes, yes, and no, no. That's part of this new covenant relationship that we have with God. So when we read about these covenants that God has made with mankind, we see a lot of who God's character is. He says, this is my covenant I make with you. This is who I am. I am faithful. I will continue to be faithful. He holds all of that, and then he says, look, here's the stipulations. Here's my commitment to you. Here's the blessings and the cursings that come from this relationship. And it can be kind of scary to see some of those when you look through the Old Testament. And yet, sometimes I think that's where we can take the new covenant that Jesus gave us, sometimes too casually. We don't think of the gravity of what it meant to even make a covenant. What it took to make that covenant with you and with us. And what that means that you are in a covenantal relationship with God. What does that mean for you with Him? So that's where we're heading. Remember, I've already asked that question of what does it mean and look like to live in a covenantal relationship with God. And like I said, next week we're going to look at the seriousness of everything and everyone involved in making the covenant. The sacrifice, the meal, the blessings and the cursings. And we're looking more closely at the Adamic, the Noahic, the Mosaic, all of those covenants that God's made throughout history as we lead up to Easter. As we lead up to where Jesus makes a new covenant with us. Not just us here, but even Bryce with the Sunday school class, or with the children's church. He'll be going with all of us together so that we can be having those conversations together with the kids of what is this covenant? What does it mean that Jesus at the Last Supper said, this is my covenant I make with you? What does it look like to be in that covenantal relationship as disciples of Jesus? But this week, these are the 3 bullet points I want us to just at least leave with. I do want us to consider the seriousness of a covenant and what that means that God made covenants with us. I think throughout this past week, I kept reflecting a lot of the covenant I made with Sammy. Getting to look at this covenant that God gave makes me acknowledge the covenant that maybe I've made with people. Or not maybe, I did make. But I want you to consider the seriousness of the covenants that you are in. Consider what that means that we are currently living in a covenant with God. Again, as I already said, with maybe some other covenants, such as a marriage covenant for some of you. And then thinking about how we get to be a little more intentional about that covenantal relationship. So I'll leave that there. Or take the time to thank God for what He's done as He's established the covenants and the new covenant with us. God, we are grateful for what it took to even make a covenant, and that you made that covenant with us. May we really take heart to acknowledge what that means. To acknowledge what that means not just for us, but all people around us that you've even offered and given through Jesus Christ as the sacrificial lamb. Help guide us as we look through this series. We need to look more and more at what each of these covenants meant and how that we get to see your character through that as we get to continue to trust you more each day as disciples of Jesus growing. We thank you, God. Even while knowing that we may have not always held up the covenant, you've renewed the covenant for us so we can have life eternally with you today and into the future. Oh, guide us in the relationships that we are in with the people around us as we get to reflect your character, your faithfulness, your love, care,